lounging, son.
All right, welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name is Ryan, and back with me today is another dope indie cartoonist. I got David Moses with me. This isn't the first time that we've done an interview, but it's the first video one. We did do a one. I feel like, I don't know, post-pandemic or pre-pandemic, and I can't, you know what I mean? Like that time is like a blur to me now. So
totally.
I wanted to get you back. I wanted to get you on the show, do a video chat with you, and kind of like introduce people to your work, dude. So welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Dude, it's my pleasure too. So I'm sure I always ask everybody, like just to give a little bit of background on themselves, their start with comic books, and in turn how that led to creating your own comics.
Yeah, so I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I was born in 84, so I'm old now. And I was growing up in the speculator boom. I have two older brothers, so we were into baseball cards, basketball, hockey, football, all that. And comics was sort of a part of that. And one day we were on the way to one of my brother's games, and we were giving a ride to another kid, and he pulls out this sketchbook, and he has like the coolest looking character that I've ever seen drawn out, ever seen in actual real life. And I didn't know that you could do this, like that you could make your own characters and all that stuff. So like literally he's showing me this stuff, he's telling me about it, and I'm just eating it up. I'm 6 years old, maybe 7. And like literally during that trip, I start drawing my own comic and make up my own character and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm going to do this. And so for a little while, I lose a little bit of steam with that. But the comics are always kind of in the periphery, or, just a part of normal kid life. So through high school, I was taking art classes and then kind of stopped. I got into music, and then, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, I started getting back into comics and realizing what the potential of the medium, and started writing them, and then eventually started drawing them again. So it's kind of a weird, long, winding road. I find that a lot of my friends, comrades in comics, will have that same kind of thing where they are into it really heavy, and then they lose interest, and then when they rediscover it, it's like, oh man, this is actually what I've been looking for all along.
Yeah, I'm sure, well, there was a couple breaks in my comic book reading, but that was more because, like me being, I'll just say it, I was in jail for a couple little small chunks of time when I was doing dumb shit when I was younger. So like that was the only time, but like every time I'd get out, it no more than a month, and I was back off and running, with comics. So I never had too big of a gap. There are like certain things that like I missed out on the beginnings of, which still kind of pisses me off. Like if I wasn't making bad choices, I would have been from the beginning. Just like Jason Aaron's Thor, because like now I can't even get those issues because they've skyrocketed. Literally, like I missed the first 10 issues, and it's so frustrating to me because like it's issue, like there's 2 of them that are really expensive. It's the Gore the God Butcher, right? And then there's one more issue in that run that's like they're both like $300 or $200. I'm not spending that on a comic book,
Amazing.
I'd rather buy multiple comics than spend $300 on one. Like
that's right.
That's where my head's at. Like, what were some of the comic books, and even like now, like, because like you're obviously huge Jack Kirby fan. I think that's pretty obvious if anybody checks out your work. So what were the comic books or creators that really made an impression on you, that when you were like deciding to like create comics yourself as you were older?
So initially, it was all the Image guys, right? For me, it was particularly Liefeld. But then, after kind of getting out of comics for a while and re-emerging into the community, at first I was just devouring everything that I could get my hands on. As I just consumed as much as I could and as many styles as I could, everything. I kind of landed on one of the big ones is John Paul Leon, rest in peace. Kirby, of course, and Mignola was a big one as well. I went through the whole like Hellboy series, and just fell in love with everything about his work. I really like people like David Aja. The
Mhm.
Hawkeye run with Fraction
Yeah.
was a big one for me as well, because I don't know if I knew that comics could be that funny, like as smartly done and just freaking hilarious. Like I'd find myself like roaring in laughter reading some of the stuff. It was just genius. But those were some of the main ones that really hooked me, that I dove into those particular artists. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, those are awesome. I mean, all of those guys I absolutely adore. John Paul,
Hmm.
dude, like this his passing was like pretty sad too, and like kind of happened right before we saw the Milestone relaunch. So I'm like, man, I
Yeah,
wish he was around to kind of see this universe that he was a part of creating come back and see the reception of it. Kirby,
yeah,
obviously, huge Kirby mark. Mignola,
yeah,
anything he draws, I will pick up, even if it's just a cover of a book
yeah,
I had no plan on reading.
yep.
Like he's doing a cover to a Masters of the Universe comic that's coming out now.
Oh,
Want to check it out also because I Tim Sheridan, who's writing it and writing the show, like I'm a fan of his. He's kind of new in comics, but the Magnolia cover with fucking He-Man and Skeletor is just so dope. It's such a
yeah,
perfect image for him to draw. But let's, like I said, I mean, even if you didn't tell me you were a Kirby fan, you get that Kirby crackle in your art so perfect. And now I'm seeing like the Magnolia shadow work that you do, because you
mm,
do a lot of inks, there's a lot of black and stuff in your work. And black and white, I do appreciate that. I love black and white comics. Like I really miss that, seeing that on a
yeah,
basis. So I was wondering if you could take us. So now you're creating your own stuff. You self-published with it's Passage Comics. I want to talk a little bit about Galactic Junk Squad, which
hmm
you sent me that previously, so I kind of glanced at it again, but I mean, it still left an impression because it was such a dope. Like, it was one of the first like indie comics self-published works that I bought as I started this journey of like trying to discover all the.
mm,
Yeah, I just want to learn a little bit about that and what goes into like self-publishing your own work and how you get it out there. For anybody listening that is kind of, I think, maybe on the fence or doesn't necessarily know, because you've been doing it for a little while now and you seem to be
mm.
well at it. So,
Well, thanks. Yeah, it was. It's such an interesting thing, especially when you're beginning this process. You don't know anything, right? You don't know like how you're going to make anything work, and then you just kind of like claw and scrape your way through, right? Like I remember just thinking back to making the first issue. I would do this typically at night. Like I would work a full-time job, come home, family stuff, and then, I'm a night owl typically. So I would go into the guest room where I had a little easel set up and try and work as much as I could. Um, and sometimes what that would mean is I would draw one line and I'd say, okay, I did something today.
hmm.
I furthered it along this much, but it's this much further along than it was before I sat down. And that sort of mentality kind of carried me through to the completion of the first issue. Because I was just starting out, I knew that I had seen the difference between good lettering and bad lettering and how that affects the reading experience. So initially I wanted to do my own, but I had zero knowledge of how to do that. And so I ended up hiring Hassan Otsman Elhau, who's, a genius, right? And he lettered the first three issues of the comic. But, like walking through that whole process of, putting some money down on it, and it showed that, okay, I'm investing in this, I'm believing in what I'm doing. And all I knew is that I had to get it out, right? Not just out of me, like onto the page, but I had to get it out into the world. And whatever happens to it, happens to it. That's beyond my control. That drive to, as one guy would call shipping it, like just ship it into the world.
Hmm.
I had done that in previous projects, previous creative projects, and I knew that once you get it out there, you start to form a sort of like knowledge base of like, okay, well, I did this last time, and here's the mistakes I made with that, so let me try it with this way. And so you start refining and sharpening your approach each time that you put something out there. Each time you draw a page in a panel, like I started out using these massive, like irregular sized pages. And I left no bleed, for the comics page. So I don't know if you, like, this is getting into kind of super technical stuff, but typically
Hmm.
you leave some space around the edge of the page so
Right.
that production can, chop off stuff that isn't needed and all this stuff. I had no idea about that, any of that stuff. So I'm like these massive pages and, no room anywhere and like irregular, like gutter sizes and all this stuff. And then, I ended up getting some paper with some guides for the gutters, and it all just flowed. Sometimes in a rocky way, sometimes it was just a trickle, but eventually things just, if you keep pushing, if you keep doing that little bit of work every night or whatever interval you have, that's what gets things out eventually. So not giving up, I think, is the primary factor for me getting my stuff out there, in whatever condition it was in. So the process was also is so addictive that I couldn't stop. I just kept having floods of ideas of like, oh wow, this world can be expanded. Like
Hmm.
I can go anywhere I want to. So what am I thinking about lately? What are the things that I'd like to say? And it just sort of develops from there. That's kind of a bird's eye view,
Hmm.
if you will,
Okay.
of that whole process for me.
And can you talk a little bit about Galactic Drug Squad and the idea behind that book and
Yeah.
kind of what it entails? And then as you after you explain that, I kind of want to know like what are some of your favorite Kirby stories also that
Mm.
kind of very influential in terms of like what you latch onto because everybody has different answers about what their favorite Kirby is. So I kind of want to know.
Right. Right. Like I think Jaime Hernandez said that his favorite Kirby inker is somebody like Dick Ayers, which is like, or Don Heck, one of those guys that's like really like the worst Kirby inker. And it's just
Yeah.
like, how did you arrive at that? But anyway, yeah. So the idea for it just kind of dropped into my head one night as I was driving. My wife and I were going on a little date, and all of a sudden it just like flooded into me, and like the central idea was like hillbilly space gods, right? And it's developed from that point into something kind of different, but that was the original idea. And part of the reason is because this was in 2017, and we were kind of reeling from 2016 and everything that happened, and especially in November with the election.
Hmm.
And so a lot of people were trying to figure out what is going on, right now. So my wife, in a gesture of compassion, reads Hillbilly Elegy, right? And then I listened to it on tape in the car on the way home from work. And first of all, let me say that is a shit book. It is a terrible, terrible book. Awful. However, one of the benefits that I got out of it is I connected with some of the stories, some of the family stories that he talks about and the history, because his lineage comes from a similar area as my own. And I realized when he's talking about some of these characteristics, I'm like, oh, I'm a hillbilly, right? Like that's the type of people that I come from, on one side of my family. And so I'm realizing this and trying to reconcile this in my mind, you know, because I grew up in a more metropolitan area. Virginia Beach is very cosmopolitan, very you know, egalitarian in a lot of ways, culturally. So realizing what I'm bringing to this cosmopolitan, which is a sort of hillbilly background, helps. It started helping me sort myself out. Okay, like not in a Jordan Peterson way, but in just like realizing who I am. And so I'm kind of considering this and like, what are the implications of this? And the way that I process this is by developing stories and by creating a sort of narrative framework for me to explore, okay, who am I? You know, what is important to me? And so I realize when I start writing things out, what is important to me starts to come to the surface, you know, whether it's something, a value that I hold, or whether it's something that I need to deal with, like in my own psyche. I know that's kind of a semi-esoteric thing, but this is really kind of what was going on in my headspace at the time. It's like, okay, so let me sort of project myself into the work. Okay, let me see what these people are going to be like, what these characters. And initially, it's, you know, each character represented basically a part of myself. You know, it wasn't necessarily, you know, well, this is like my dad, this is like my mom, this is like my brothers, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, no, this is the part of me that wants to control everything. You know, this is the part of me that gets really upset at making mistakes. This is the part of me that's like, you know, doesn't care about the details, but only cares about the big vision, you know, and so on and so forth. That's basically where it came from, if that makes sense. And there was a second part of your question that I wanted to follow up with that with. That's essentially where the idea for this, the whole concept of the title came from, though. I'm trying to remember that other part.
Kirby, the favorite Kirby stories.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So during this time as well, August of 2017 was Kirby's centennial birthday. So Marvel starts doing these reissues, and there's a little bit of buzz around, you know, him. And growing up, I was always sort of like freaked out by his stuff. There's like a grotesque quality, right, where it's like this beautiful ugliness, or like this sort of like brutality in some ways of how he expresses the nature of battle, the nature of drama. And when I was a kid, it intimidated me and it kind of put me off. I was more of a fan of John Buscema, has a more classical line to his work. And classical, I mean like Renaissance, basically. But there was something about Kirby, and I think it was mainly the cosmic stuff initially, that I could not look away from. You know, when I would get these reprints and just see there's something, the dynamics, the power, and I'm like, okay, even though some of this stuff is not, you know, how Michelangelo Merisi de Caravaggio would express it, there's something valuable and essentially powerful about what he's doing. And so I started picking up some other titles, and one of them was Forever People, which is just one of the greatest comics works for understanding how fascism works, and what anti-fascism can look like in a way that's like, you know, you've got the Forever People, and they were sort of Kirby's hippies, right? His way to explore what was going on in the hippies, the early 70s, you know, what he was seeing culturally around him, and what do these young kids want? You know, what are they saying to us? What are they going after? And you know, it's such a compassionate look on youth and a advocacy for that passion of youth. Like he's like, no, listen, we've got to listen, right? We've got to see what they're saying, because their imagination and their lack of being jaded and their idealism is the thing that drives us to improvement, right? As a society. Like when you get older and you get set in your ways, what you want to do is you want to force everybody else to have what you had, right? They don't want what we had, you know, what the older generation had. They want this thing, and we've got to listen to them because they're going to be in charge of the world later. Anyway, it helped me to understand particular aspects of what was going on around me at the time. I got the book in 2017. I just devoured it, and it was one of the older, like early 2000s black and white, like grayscale reprints. Actually, it's right here because it's never far from me. Well, this is the Mr. Miracle one that I got too. But so you've got the black and white art, but then you've got some of the colors are gray tones as well.
Oh, nice.
And
I've never seen that.
yeah, these came out in like like 2000. I think they reprinted everything in that way, I think, to make it just affordable. But there was something so immediate about the art in the black and white, you know, like we were talking about. And I think this is one of the things that like really drew me into black and white art. There's something very direct about it. And I was just soaking in this book. And today, still, it is my favorite Kirby title. Because you get the amazing visuals, you get these amazing characters, and then you get this world where he's dealing with what's going on. And it's not just relevant to Nixon era, you know, when he put it out, it's relevant to now. And it'll always be relevant to America, in my opinion. So it's one that I can come back to again and again and again and get something from it.
That's awesome, dude. I love your explanation of Forever People, because I think too, when I was younger, like I would look at Kirby stuff and I couldn't fully appreciate it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
his art at all. Like people would be like, he's the king. And I was like, when I was a little kid, I'm like, I would rather look at something else. You know?
King of what?
Yeah. So I just didn't get it, right? But as I got older, I began to appreciate it more. And then I began to like further into his stuff. And I feel like every day, every week, every month, every year, like I feel like I've become more of a Kirby fan. Like it continues, and like he's putting out new work, but I just become a bigger fan of his work as time goes on. And you know, I love the cosmic stuff. And it's not because I'm a DC guy than a Marvel guy, but I really, seeing both and reading both, I'm like, man, this Mr. Miracle, this New Gods, this shit book, and it's clear to see that why people say it was ahead of its time, because it is. It's crazy. Like people didn't appreciate it. Like it's insane. Like this was just like he had so much inside that head of his. Like I can only imagine what would have continued if he had lived just a little bit longer. He could have borne the fruits of like that image book that he did, and he finally like made a lot of money off that book, more so than he had made his entire career, you know. Like he's just, you know. And then there's the whole Stan Jack thing, and like I become more appreciative of him with that too. And I don't want to get into it because like people, you know, like it's a touchy subject with some people, but I'm on Team Jack. That's all I'll say. Team Jack.
Did you read the Reisman biography yet?
I did read that book, and man, that it broke my heart, you know, and it just like it made me so upset. And I'm just like, fuck, man. Not just for Jack, but for Ditko as well. And even though Ditko was a curmudgeon and stuff, you can't deny what he did. But it's just that book was like heartbreaking to me.
It is. And it you know, for me, it humanized Stan a little bit more.
Yes.
Because you can see the impulses that are driving him. He can't really control, which is like this sort of like need for recognition, this need to, there was some level of notoriety or appreciation that he never got.
Yeah.
And when you realize that, like, that's what's driving this guy, you know, you're like, oh, that's why he took credit for everything, right? Because he's
Yeah.
looking for something to transition him to this height that he feels like he needs to get to,
Hmm.
and he never gets there. And it's tragicomic, you know, the
Yeah.
whole what a sad life in
I
a way.
know. It was, I don't know what I was expecting from it, but just the title, The Rise and Fall, like I was on like Amazon and I was like looking for something. Because sometimes I'll fish on Amazon to see what books are coming out because like they'll have like the titles,
Hmm.
fans of comic book stores. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden that popped up and it was coming out like a month later. I'm like, what the fuck? Like I didn't even know this book was coming out. And then, or no, maybe there's it might have been 2 or 3 months because then all of a sudden I got home one day and the book was like there and I didn't even realize it was out. And
Mm.
I just poured through it. I read it so fast I couldn't put it down. But it was, yeah, it was. I definitely think anybody that wants to know more about the history should read that book. Also,
Totally.
the book that I picked up, I haven't read yet, called Nuff Said, that was published by Tomorrow
Oh yeah.
with
Hmm.
Stan and Jack interviews. Scott Shaw,
Yeah.
he's a pretty famous cartoonist himself. He had told me, if you want a good look into their relationship, that's an essential book that you need to read. Pick that book up. So I picked it up. I just haven't, it's literally just a book of text and interviews. And I'm so backed up with my other reading, but recommend that book as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But,
Two Marls is actually down the road from me.
oh, really?
He's in Raleigh. Yeah,
Oh,
John,
that's tight.
which is funny, but yeah, I need to get that one.
Yeah, definitely pick it up. So let's transition into some of your more recent stuff. Tales from the Holy Mountain. Discovered that company publisher. I know they do shirts and other stuff because of Jonathan Kachuba, who did a
Oh
book.
yeah.
So then I saw you were doing something with them. I saw that that hilarious video that you did, which by the way, genius marketing, dude. Like I wish I could come up with something cool like that because I feel like that brought a lot of people to the book. I want to know how you landed doing a book with them. I'm just thinking of the video in my head right now. I want to know how you landed with them. I know that you've also done work with like strangers, other stuff.
Mm.
Kind of tell us a little bit about that and the difference in creativity with doing stuff with other companies, right, as opposed to doing your own stuff.
Yeah. So it happened so you know, kind of beautifully, like by chance or you know, I don't know, divine intervention perhaps, but like basically I had been aware of Holy Mountain because they put out a record from one of my favorite bands in high school, Zayo, like a metalcore band. I don't know if you're familiar with Zayo. Anyway, they put out a new record in like 2016 or 2017, and it's fucking awesome. But I was like, okay, who are these guys? Holy Mountain,
Mhm.
and oh my gosh, they're right down the street from me as well. So actually, I had finished the first issue of Galactic Junk Squad, and I was looking into places to get it digitized. FedEx on the big digital scanner, they wanted like $8 a page. And here I am, like this totally broke, you know, just scraping by a thread, you know, comics creator. And I'm like, I can't afford $8 a page. That's like $100 for me to
Mhm.
just scan this. And so I sent out an email to them. I was like, hey, can I use your scanner? You know, like, I don't know what you guys are into. I never got a reply at that time. And I found somewhere to do it for cheap. Um, but later I was like, you know, since these guys are down the street and Danny, the main guy, is he's posting a lot about comics. You know, he's posting like what he's listening to and the comic that he's reading, you know, each morning. And I'm like, you know, I think he posted a Tom Scioli. It was either, I think it was Fantastic Four Grand Design or Transformers versus GI Joe. And you know, I was like, okay, I think we might be kindred spirits. Let me just stop by and just say, hey, I'm a cartoonist in the area. This is the work that I've done. I support what you're doing and I appreciate what you're doing. basically. So I stopped by just on a whim, basically, one day during lunch break at work, and we hit it off. We started talking about Stan and Jack and Steve Ditko, and we find a whole bunch of shared interests especially in Silver Age comics, but it's just rolling the conversation. And so Danny, he's like, well, how much is your book? This is volume 1 of Galactic Junk Squad. And I was like, oh, it's this much. He's like, give me 10 of them. And I'm like, what? Okay, sure. Yeah, okay. I'll get 10 and I'll drop them off tomorrow. That was like a wild and positive experience that I didn't expect, And so when the next issue came out, the one that we started, I took a stack over and I was just like, here, this is for you. This is, I just want to let you know again that I've got something new out, And he's like, yeah, well, give me 10. Actually, let's take 20 of those. And I'm like, okay, all right, that sounds cool. Here, let me, bring him by tomorrow. So I bring him by the next day, and he's like, I was thinking, we should work together. We should do something together. And this is like something that I dreamed of, right? Like far off possibility. Like what if one day down the road I got to do something with Holy Mountain? That would be really rad. And here's Danny saying like, yeah, let's do something now. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna stop whatever I've got going on, creatively, and I'm gonna focus on this. And he pulls out this little promo for the magazine that they do, WDW3, We Do What We Want. It's like a little booklet, and he says, let's do it this size, whatever we do. And he's like, let's make it focus around our mascot, the Templar. And I'm like, okay, all right, so what else should we do? He's like, just do whatever you want to do and bring it to me, and we'll talk about it if it needs to change. But so I go home, and similar to the creation of Galactic Junk Squad, these ideas just start flowing, and I'm like recording on the on my phone, and I'm driving home and getting all this stuff together, and I'm sending him ideas, and he's like, yeah, man, that sounds cool. And he's just totally hands off. And anything that I bring to him, he's like, let's do that. And so I read out a whole script, and he's like, man, it sounds good. And then we're trying to figure out logistics of when we're going to make this happen, payments and all this stuff. And then I go out of town for a wedding, and this is in August, or end of July of 2020. And right in the middle of a pandemic, the vaccines are not out, and I am like freaking out. Like, the only reason I'm here is because this person is so important to me, but this is like really, I'm on edge, being among a bunch of people. So when I get home, I have to quarantine, and I'm like, this is the perfect time to knock out this 14 or 12-page issue. So I just did it. And I was like, you know what? We'll figure out all the logistics later. This is the time that I have to work on it. Let me just see what I can make myself. That was it. We figured out everything, and they put it out in time for Halloween. It was enough of a positive experience that, a couple months later, Danny and I go comic shopping, and he's like, hey, do you want to do another one? And I'm like, yes, I do. Let's do as many of these as we can. So that was essentially a winding narrative of how this all went down. It's
That's
totally
awesome.
wild. Like, I'm still kind of baffled by it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. Like, I've always thought that, and I think that nothing happens by accident either. So that's an awesome story. How like that all came into play. I had no idea, like, like that was where the story was going to go. So it's very cool to hear that. So what else do you have currently in the works? Like, what else are you working on right now? And when can we expect some new stuff?
Well, I am I just passed the halfway point in a project that I can't yet talk about out of respect for my collaborator. So I'm collaborating with somebody. They wrote a
Okay.
script, and I really liked it, and I respect their taste, and it was just kind of right up our alley. So what I'll say is two things. We're planning to do a Kickstarter for it in either late July or early August. It's going to be awesome. And two, it is a cosmic samurai western.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
All right.
that's all I can say. And I may have said too much, but I'm really having a lot of fun with this.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
Very excited for that. To check that out. Make sure that you're sharing links because
Okay.
I'll share them on my page. I'll share them all over social media too, because I'm very excited to see what you got cooking.
Excellent.
Galactic Junk Squad. Any more stuff that's just your stuff that you're working on?
Yes, sort of. It's kind of on the back burner development side. I've done 2 pages already. I did those late last year, like November timeframe. I don't know when I'm going to be able to return to it with, full energy yet. But I am starting to bring it into my consideration of like, okay, like how am I going to execute? I have plans for 2 more issues for sure, with the potential to go on indefinitely. But like I want to really kind of wrap up the arc that began the whole thing within 2 issues, and I have like how I want to do that. So for example, like take these stories, break them down into chapters, 5-page chapters a piece, and then they're all going to converge into this, final issue that's going to be like this super huge thing. But as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, how am I gonna fit that in? Because it's such a time consuming, painstaking process to do cartooning, especially if you are writing and drawing. We'll see when that happens. It's on a very flexible timetable for when it may come out. It might not even be this. There might not be anything for this year, although I may start posting some pages on my Patreon. So if you want to get into it, that might be the place to come.
All right, cool. Well, I mean, that kind of leads me to, my final question. I want to, first of all, I want to thank you again for taking time to chat with me, dude. It was really cool to finally actually somewhat meet you in person and be able to.
Yeah.
But if you could share where we can find you online, all your social links, and I'm going to drop those down below in the comments as well.
Okay, thank you. So you can mainly find me on Instagram at d.moses.l. And I also have a website, pastiche.com, Pastitch. And then Patreon. I do a lot of updates and some series of writings and stuff like that I eventually collect into zines. And then, there's certain levels where, you can get whatever I'm putting out, like automatically it comes to your door. So those are the main places that you can find me.
All right, man. Well, like I said, thank you for doing this. And I'm definitely going to want to do this with you again for sure, because this was
absolutely.
All right.
Dude, thank you so much, man.
Oh, of course. It was my pleasure.